A hysterical slide into a police state. A shameful police force intruding with scant regard to common sense or tradition. An irrational overreaction driven by fear. These are not the accusations of wild-eyed campaigners. They come from the lips of one of our most eminent jurists, Lord Sumption, former Justice of the Supreme Court.
Now, as most of you will know, and you just heard there, the police seem to be going very heavy-handed with the government's guidance on the lockdown rules, which, let me tell you, are not as stringent as most people think, and the media hysteria would have you believe. That, it seems, might have even got the police believing it as well, especially up in places like Derby, where they have been taking extreme measures to stop people from doing things that are not against the regulations. Now, as you heard there, Lord Sumption is not very happy with the way things have been going, and of course the actions of Derbyshire Police, which he thoroughly takes to task in this interview on BBC Radio 4 that aired yesterday. He also takes the media to task for whipping up hysteria based on politicians' feelings or preference without actually having any evidence to back it up, which is something I have been saying throughout this situation. I would say 90% of, say, the BBC's coverage on this current crisis has consisted of people appearing on their news programmes giving opinions without any real facts to back it up. Because, of course, the people with the actual facts are talking to the Prime Minister and people like that, not the shitweasels at the BBC. Now, pretty much every single media outlet going is reporting on this today after it started blowing up in the last few days. With this article's headline saying police to be sent new bat flu guidance after UK accused of slide into a police state, which is something Lord Sumption will go through in the interview we'll check out now. There's no point in reading through this. We can just hear what Lord Sumption has to say, because in my opinion, he's almost spot on in absolutely everything he says. So, let's check it out.
The real problem is that when human societies lose their freedom, it's not usually because tyrants have taken it away. It's usually because people willingly surrender their freedom in return for protection against some external threat. And the threat is usually a real threat, but usually exaggerated. And that's what I fear we are seeing now. The pressure on politicians has come from the public. They want action. They don't pause to ask whether the action will work. They don't ask themselves whether the cost will be worth paying. They want action anyway. And anyone who has studied history will recognize here the classic symptoms of collective hysteria. Hysteria is infectious. We are working ourselves up into a lather in which we exaggerate the threat and stop asking ourselves whether the cure may be worse than the disease.
Well, I bet the BBC really didn't want him coming out with half of what he just said there. While the threat may be a real one, it has been blown completely out of proportion, which is obviously not good. The only thing I think he got wrong there was saying that it is the public clamouring for the government to act, when in actual fact it has been the media hysteria whipped up around this situation that has caused the government to act in such a way. You have to remember that every time the media claims they know what public opinion wants and they're shouting it out, it's usually the complete opposite. The last 4 years of Brexit have clearly shown us that. But I would have to say, for the most part, he is spot on there, and let me tell you, he only continues to savage this situation more as this interview continues. So, let's carry on.
At a time like this, as you acknowledge, citizens do look to the state for protection, for assistance. We shouldn't be surprised then if the state takes on new powers, if it responds. That is what it has been asked to do, almost demanded of it.
Yes, that is absolutely true. We should not be surprised. But we have to recognize that this is how societies become despotisms. And we also have to recognize that this is a process which leads naturally to exaggeration. The symptoms of coronavirus are clearly serious for those with other significant medical conditions, especially if they're old. There are exceptional cases in which young people have been struck down, which have had a lot of publicity, but the numbers are pretty small. The Italian evidence, for instance, suggests that only 12% of deaths, is it possible to say, coronavirus was the main cause of death. So yes, this is serious, and yes, it's understandable that people cry out to the government. But the real question is this serious enough to warrant putting most of our population into house imprisonment, wrecking our economy for an indefinite period, destroying businesses that honest and hard-working people have taken years to build up, saddling future generations with debt, depression, stress, heart attacks, suicides, and unbelievable distress inflicted on millions of people who are not especially vulnerable and will suffer only mild symptoms or none at all, like the Health Secretary and the Prime Minister.
Well, that was a pretty damning outlook on the media and political hysteria that's going on right now, I think you would agree. And given all of those detrimental effects he said this situation is currently having and going to have on various people in this country, no, I would say it's not worth it. But most of you already know, the way I would have suggested dealing with this situation is, as soon as we heard about it, lock down the borders, stop the movement of people completely, and then any cases that had already come here before we found out about it, because obviously China are not exactly transparent with anything they do, so it was going around there for who knows how long before we actually knew about it. They could have prevented any need to shut down the actual country and make the people of this country stay indoors. But they didn't, so it is what it is. And as for what the BBC host was saying about it should be no surprise that the state takes on new powers, yes, that's true, there should be no surprise, but the powers should be for a very limited time period and of course reviewed every week or 2 or 3 weeks at the most. Maybe an argument could be made for a month, but I would suggest all powers should be reviewed weekly. That is the way a democracy should do with it. Obviously, we live in the illusion of democracy, as I was saying for the entirety of last year. Because as Lord Sumption says, the current way things are going, we are moving towards despotism. Which, if you see Sargon of Akkad's video over on his Akkad Daily channel yesterday, you would see that Hungary is essentially already there. Ruling by decree with no elections. Let's hope they don't try and pull that here. Now, he does say something pretty telling in there, which I think he is insinuating that only 12% of the reported Italian deaths are actually attributed to the bat flu situation that is going on, which is something me and many other people have suspected for a long time. But I feel at this early stage it's going to be very difficult to know who has died from what, but it certainly sounded like to me he has seen figures that suggest only 12% can be attributed directly to the Chinese bat flu. I can only imagine everything he's just said there is not what the BBC wanted or expected him to say.
The executive, the government, is all of a sudden really rather powerful and really rather unscrutinised. Parliament is in recess. It's due to come back in late April. We're not quite sure whether it will or not. The Prime Minister is closeted away, communicating via his phone. There is not a lot in the way of scrutiny, is there?
No. Certainly there's not a lot in the way of institutional scrutiny. The press has engaged in a fair amount of scrutiny. There has been some good and challenging journalism. But mostly the press has, I think, echoed and indeed amplified the general panic.
Talk about nail on top of the head there. I'm no fan of them closing Parliament, that's for sure. We should be able to scrutinise through our MPs what the government are actually doing, even though, like I've said many times, there is not really much scrutiny the MPs can do in Parliament because, of course, the massive majority the Tories have. But at least questioning them is something. Better than we have now that Parliament's been shut down. But him calling out the media for throwing petrol on the fire of panic that is going on right now because of this situation is something me and many other people have been saying for a long time, and it's a shame the government's not calling out for them. Instead, it seems, more often than not, bowing down to media pressure around whatever they want to happen or how dire the situation they claim is. It's good to hear someone like Lord Sumption pointing out that the press has mostly fueled the panic, because I have been saying it for weeks, as have many of my viewers. It's about time some of these establishment types started pointing it out as well, because it's really not helping, and just shows the media for the dirty snivelling shitweasels and no good spunk trumpets that they actually are.
The restrictions in movement have also changed the relationship between the police and those whose who's in name, at least they serve. The police are naming and shaming citizens for travelling at what they see as the wrong time or driving to the wrong place. Does that set alarm bells ringing for you as a former senior member of the judiciary?
Well, I have to say it does. The tradition of policing in this country is that policemen are citizens in uniform. They are not members of a disciplined hierarchy operating just at the government's command. Yet in some parts of the country, the police have been trying to stop people from doing things like travelling to take exercise in the open country, which are not contrary to the regulations, simply because ministers have said that they would prefer us not to. The police have no power to enforce ministers' preferences, but only legal regulations, which don't go anything like as far as the government's guidance. I have to say that the behaviour of the Derbyshire police in trying to shame people into using their undoubted right to travel to take exercise in the country and wrecking beauty spots in the fells so that people don't want to go there is frankly disgraceful. This is what a police state is like. It's a state in which the government can issue orders or express preferences with no legal authority, and the police will enforce ministers' wishes. I have to say that most police forces have behaved in a thoroughly sensible and moderate fashion. Derbyshire police have shamed our policing traditions. There is a natural tendency, of course, and a strong temptation for the police to lose sight of their real functions and turn themselves from citizens in uniform into glorified school prefects. I think it's really sad that the Derbyshire police have failed to resist that.
So we get to Lord Sumption talking about the police forces, namely the ones that are acting like the Gestapo, roaming around telling people what they can and can't do when, like I said earlier, they are not against the government's regulations. Therefore, the police have no right to stop people doing it because it's not against any law. Derbyshire police, as you heard him say, are the number one offenders in this situation as it stands, or at least that we know about, because they are openly promoting it on their Twitter and even trying to defend it when the tweet got ratioed. Lord Sumption is spot on also when he says the police officers of this country are citizens in a uniform, nothing more. Therefore, they should be very careful about the actions they take in this situation, because the people of this country will not forgive or forget if they try to abuse these powers. As you heard Lord Sumption say, the government's guidance goes much further than the laws that they've actually brought in. So, guidance is just guidance, not actual law. The police cannot enforce guidance, they have to enforce the law, and not break it themselves. Which realistically, given what the Derbyshire Police Force has been accused of doing, and it seems promoting on their Twitter, should realistically be against the law in some sense. It's against people's right to do what they're allowed to do within the bounds of the current laws, even if they are rather draconian. Like he says, they have an undoubted right to travel anywhere and take exercise if they wish. The government's regulations or rules, laws, whatever you want to call them, do not stop them from doing that, which is something we have been seeing a lot of. Police checkpoints stopping cars, asking them what they're doing, and of course deciding what's essential goods from a shop. That is not how the UK works and will lead to civil unrest, I would bet. He is right to point out that most police forces have acted in a professional and community-spirited fashion in regards to this situation, but Derbyshire police, like he said, have gone well above and beyond what they should be doing, and I think something needs to be done about this, either on a government level or from the Independent Police Complaints Commission, for what use that actually is, which, to be honest, as far as I'm aware, is not much. I think saying that they could turn themselves into glorified prefects is a bit of a beating around the bush way to go about it. I'd say they'd be essentially turning themselves into the Gestapo, which an argument could be made. Some of what Derbyshire police have been doing could already be considered the same. It's pretty bad.
There will be people listening who admire your legal wisdom, but will also say, well, he's not an epidemiologist. He doesn't know how disease spreads. He doesn't understand the risks to the health service if this thing gets out of control. What do you say to them?
What I say to them is I'm not a scientist, but it is the right and duty of every citizen to look and see what the scientists have said and to analyze it for themselves and to draw common sense conclusions. We are all perfectly capable of doing that, and there's no particular reason why the scientific nature of the problem should mean that we have to resign our liberty into the hands of scientists. We all have critical faculties, and it's rather important in a moment of national panic that we should maintain them.
Well, I don't need to add anything to that bit. It's pretty self-explanatory, and he's bang on the money. It's up to us to make the informed decisions that we feel are best for us and best for our country. Now, before I go, I've started doing live streams and uploading gaming content on my second channel. If you would like to come and join me for a live stream to chat in real time, have an interest in gaming related content on YouTube, or just want to follow me over there because you are a legend, the link will be down in the video description below and as a pinned comment. I hope to see you all there. Now, as always, before I go, I want to thank our PayPal, Patreon, Subscribestar and YouTube members for supporting the channel, along with everyone who watches my videos. Remember to let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Leave a like, subscribe with the notification bell and share this video as it helps the channel a lot. And I will see you all in the next one.
There is a pattern consistent throughout history of oppressed people turning on the oppressors. Slaves against their owners, the peasantry against the feudal barons, colonies, Mr. Verhofstadt, against their empires. And that is why Britain is leaving. And it doesn't matter which language you use, we are going and we are glad to be going. We're off.